What happens when a gang of bikers picks the wrong man to mess with? One minute, they were terrorizing a diner, blocking the door, daring a man to stand up to them. Then Big Shaq walked in, and with just 6 words, he made their leader flinch. "You sure you want to do this?" What followed was pure chaos. Backs turned, alliances shattered, and a sheriff stepping in at the perfect moment. By the end of the night, the entire town was watching their toughest guy beg to escape. But what Shaq did next? That's the part no one saw coming. Keep watching. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. Mr. Carter stepped out of his car, inhaling the crisp night air as he stretched his aching limbs. It had been a long drive, hours on the road, endless highway, the kind of trip that made a man crave 2 simple things: a hot meal and a strong cup of coffee. He glanced up at the diner's neon sign buzzing faintly above the entrance. It was one of those classic small-town joints, the kind with a long counter, cracked leather booths, and the scent of fried food hanging thick in the air. But the second he stepped toward the door, he felt it. A shift. The kind of silence that wasn't natural. His stomach tightened as he noticed them. A group of leather-clad bikers hunched over the counter, laughter echoing through the near-empty diner. At first, they seemed caught up in their own world, trading jokes, clanking beer bottles, completely unaware of him. But the moment Carter pushed open the door, the laughter stopped. All at once, their heads turned. Eyes locked onto him, sizing him up. Carter had been in enough situations to know when a room had just turned against him. He forced himself to walk forward, ignoring the sudden tightness in his chest. He wasn't doing anything wrong. It was just a diner. Just a place to eat. He refused to turn around just because a bunch of rough-looking men didn't like his presence. Still, every step toward the counter felt heavier than the last. The waitress, a thin, nervous-looking woman in her late 40s, stood behind the register, wiping down a coffee pot with slow, deliberate movements. She flicked her eyes toward Carter but didn't say anything. Didn't even greet him. He swallowed hard. Maybe it was in his head. Maybe they were just staring because he was new. Maybe. But when he finally reached the counter and slid onto a stool, the tension only thickened. A low chuckle rumbled from the far end of the diner. Then a voice, deep, slow, deliberate. "Looks like you're lost, boy." Carter stiffened, gripping the edge of the counter. The voice belonged to the biggest of the bikers, a broad-shouldered man with a long graying beard, arms covered in tattoos. His leather vest had a patch that read, "President, the leader." The man barely looked up from his plate as he spoke, tearing a chunk off his burger and chewing slowly, as if he had all the time in the world. Carter exhaled through his nose. He knew the kind of game this was. He wasn't lost. He was just the wrong kind of person in the wrong kind of place. Still, he kept his voice even, calm, controlled. "Nope," he said, lifting the menu without looking up. "I know exactly where I am." A few of the bikers chuckled under their breath, exchanging amused glances. Carter could feel it now. The test. The moment where he either backed down or stood his ground. The waitress cleared her throat, clearly uncomfortable. "Can I get you something, hon?" Carter nodded. "Coffee and a cheeseburger." The woman hesitated, then nodded quickly and turned toward the kitchen. But before she could take a single step, a boot shoved a chair into Carter's path. It scraped loudly against the floor, the sound sharp, deliberate. The biker leader finally looked up, a lazy grin on his face. "Not tonight, you ain't." Carter glanced down at the chair blocking his way, then up at the biker staring him down. His pulse pounded in his ears, and just like that, he realized something. Carter's grip tightens around the door handle for half a second. His instincts whisper, "Leave." But another voice inside him pushes back. "Why should I? It's 2024. He's just a man looking for a meal." The warm aroma of sizzling bacon and fresh coffee fills the small-town diner, but the atmosphere is anything but inviting. The neon open 24/7 sign flickers against the window, casting an eerie glow. At the counter, the biker gang, 5 men draped in leather and denim, watch him like he just wandered into enemy territory. Their jackets are patched with skulls and flames, devil's sons stitched on the back. Carter's steps are measured as he approaches the counter. He doesn't want to escalate things, but he refuses to cower. A waitress, no older than 19, fiddles with her notepad, avoiding eye contact. Her face is tense, her fingers twitchy. She knows something he doesn't. A deep voice cuts through the silence. "This ain't your kind of place." Carter glances at the speaker, Rick, the leader. A grizzled man in his late 40s, his beard thick, arms tattooed with faded ink. His boots are propped up on a nearby chair, the posture of someone who's used to getting his way. Carter keeps his voice calm. "I'm just here for a meal." Rick smirks, taking a slow sip of his beer. The other bikers chuckle, their laughter low and knowing. "Yeah, maybe try the next town over." Carter exhales through his nose. Didn't realize a public diner needed an invitation. He gestures toward the counter. "I'll be quick. Just a burger and some coffee, then I'm gone." Rick leans forward, amusement flickering in his dark eyes. "I don't think you're getting it, boy." The word boy lands heavier than it should. Carter feels the weight of it, the history, the intention. The other bikers shift in their seats. One, a bald man with a chain necklace, grins and cracks his knuckles. Another nudges his beer aside like he's making room for a fight. The waitress bites her lip, looking between them. She wants to say something, but she doesn't. Carter refuses to look away. "Just here for food, that's all." Rick exhales dramatically. "Not tonight, you ain't." Then, he kicks a chair into Carter's path. It scrapes against the floor, the sharp sound cutting through the tension. The entire diner watches, breath held. Carter stares down at the chair. A single barrier, small but intentional. It's not about the chair, it's about power. A test. Carter's fingers flex. He knows this game, knows exactly what happens next. Before he can decide his next move, the diner door swings open. The air changes. A new presence looms. The bikers glance up, then freeze. Carter turns his head, and his breath catches. Shaquille O'Neal just walked in. The diner falls silent. The smell of sizzling bacon and fresh coffee lingers in the air, but no one is eating anymore. All eyes are locked on Carter, waiting to see what he'll do. Carter clenches his jaw, exhaling slowly. He's been in situations like this before, where a group of men, fueled by arrogance and ignorance, thought they had the right to decide where he belonged. But tonight, all he wanted was a meal and some rest before continuing his drive. He looks down at the chair that Rick just kicked into his path. A simple obstacle, yet weighted with a clear message. You don't belong here. Trying to keep things civil, Carter calmly steps to the side, attempting to go around it. But before he can take another step, another biker, a stocky man with a patchy beard, slides his foot out, blocking Carter's path again. Rick chuckles, leaning back in his chair with an air of smug superiority. "See, thing is, we don't take kindly to outsiders walking in like they own the place." The other bikers nod, a few grinning as if they were enjoying a private joke. The waitress behind the counter stiffens, gripping a pot of coffee so tight her knuckles turn white. But she doesn't say a word. Carter's eyes flicker toward the counter, debating whether to just turn and leave. But he knows that's exactly what they want, to make him feel small, to make him retreat. Instead, he straightens his posture and clears his throat. "I'm just here for a meal," he says, his voice firm but even. "Not looking for trouble." Rick smirks, feigning surprise. "Oh, you think we're the trouble? That's rich." Another biker, a wiry man with tattoos covering his arms, snorts. "We're just making sure folks know their place is all." Carter doesn't respond. He just exhales, refusing to take the bait. But then Rick makes a mistake. He reaches for Carter's arm. Before Rick's fingers can graze his sleeve, the sound of the door creaking open cuts through the tension. A massive shadow fills the doorway, blocking out the neon light from the diner's window. The entire room seems to shrink as a deep, unmistakable voice rumbles through the air. "You want to move that chair?" Every head whips toward the entrance. Rick's smirk falters. The biker closest to the door visibly stiffens, his hand dropping from his beer as his eyes widen. Carter doesn't even have to turn around to know who it is. Shaquille O'Neal steps fully inside, his towering frame making the narrow diner feel even smaller. Dressed in a simple hoodie and jeans, he doesn't need anything flashy to command attention. His mere presence does that. The bikers exchange uneasy glances. Rick, however, forces a scoff. "And who the hell are you?" Shaq tilts his head, smirking. Just a guy who doesn't like bullies. Rick's fingers twitch against the table. The entire diner is watching, waiting for what happens next. And for the first time all night, the bikers don't look so sure of themselves. The entire diner seems to shrink as Shaquille O'Neal steps through the door, his massive frame casting a long shadow across the room. The soft creak of the wooden floor beneath his weight is the only sound, breaking through the thick silence. Rick leans back in his chair, eyeing the newcomer with an unimpressed smirk. "And who the hell are you?" he sneers, tilting his head toward Shaq like he's sizing him up. Shaq doesn't respond immediately. He takes a slow step forward, his size alone enough to make most of the bikers shift uncomfortably in their seats. The ceiling lights reflect off his bald head as he folds his arms across his chest. His calm, amused expression never wavers. "The guy who's about to ruin your night," Shaq finally says, his deep voice carrying through the room like rolling thunder. The waitress at the counter lets out a barely audible gasp, her hands gripping the coffee pot as if it's the only thing keeping her steady. Carter, still standing near the blocked chair, watches the scene unfold, his pulse racing. The other bikers exchange uneasy glances. One of them, a younger guy with a scruffy beard, mutters under his breath, "Dude, that's Shaq." Rick, however, doesn't flinch. He chuckles, shaking his head. "Big man thinks he's scary," he taunts, standing up from his chair. Despite his tough demeanor, his boots scuff slightly against the floor as he plants his feet. Shaq takes another step closer. Now the distance between them is almost nothing. The former NBA giant towers over Rick, making him look like a child in comparison. "I don't think I'm scary," Shaq says casually. "I know I am." The tension in the diner tightens like a coiled spring, the air so thick that even the hum of the fluorescent lights seems louder. Rick crosses his arms, trying to hold his ground. "You think size is everything? You don't scare me." Shaq raises an eyebrow, his smirk growing. "Then let's find out," he says, cracking his knuckles. A few bikers shuffle back instinctively. The waitress lets out a small gasp. Rick scoffs, but there's a flicker of hesitation in his eyes. The question lingers in the air. Does he really want to test Shaq? Shaq leans against the counter, towering over Rick and his gang. His massive hands crack his knuckles, the sound sharp in the dead silence of the diner. "You sure you want to do this?" His voice is calm, too calm. Rick's smirk twitches, but he quickly recovers, leaning back in his chair. "We don't back down," he sneers, looking around at his gang for support. A few of them nod, but one shifts uncomfortably in his seat. Shaq tilts his head, his grin widening. "Neither do I." A low murmur spreads through the diner. The waitress grips her notepad tightly, her eyes darting between the two men. Carter, still standing near the entrance, watches, his fists clenched. One of the younger bikers swallows hard. He leans toward the guy next to him and whispers, "Dude, that's Shaq." Rick glares at him. "I don't care if he's the damn president. He's disrespecting us." He turns back to Shaq, eyes narrowing. "You walk in here thinking you own the place?" Shaq raises an eyebrow. "Nah, man. Just thinking I can enjoy a meal like anybody else. But seems like you got a problem with that." Rick pushes his chair back with a loud screech, standing to his full height. He's tall, probably around 6'3". But compared to Shaq, he might as well be a teenager. "You want to take this outside?" he challenges, puffing out his chest. Shaq nods slowly. "All right," he says, rolling his shoulders. "Let's take this outside." A sharp inhale echoes from the waitress. "Oh my God, is this really happening?" she whispers. Rick's cocky grin falters just for a second, but he quickly masks it. "Let's go!" he growls, jerking his head toward the door. The other bikers hesitate. One of them, an older guy with a gray beard, shakes his head. "Rick, man, let it go," he mutters. Rick snaps his head toward him. "Let it go?" He laughs bitterly. "Are you scared?" The older biker sighs. "I'm just saying. It's Shaq, man." Rick scoffs, looking Shaq up and down. "He's just a ball player." Shaq chuckles. "You're about to find out I do a lot more than that." The tension is thick as the group heads toward the exit. Carter watches with wide eyes, his heart pounding. He'd come in for a quiet meal, and now he was about to witness something straight out of a movie. The other diners stay in their seats, whispering among themselves, but a few curious ones get up and follow toward the door. As the crowd spills into the parking lot, the night air feels electric. The diner's neon sign flickers above them, casting a glow on the cracked pavement. The bikers spread out, forming a loose circle around Rick and Shaq. Rick rolls his shoulders, cracking his neck. "You ready?" he taunts. Shaq doesn't even move. He just smirks. "You first!" Rick lunges forward. But before he can throw a punch, the screech of tires cuts through the night. A pickup truck speeds into the lot, brakes squealing. The driver's side door slams open, and a man steps out. The silver badge on his chest catches the light. The sheriff has arrived. The heavy diner door swings shut behind them, the neon lights buzzing overhead as the group steps onto the parking lot's cracked pavement. A cool night breeze brushes past, but the tension in the air makes it suffocating. Rick rolls his shoulders, sneering at Shaq as his boots crunch against the gravel. "You're all size, big guy, but size don't mean skill." Shaq lets out a deep, amused chuckle. He slowly crosses his arms, towering over Rick and his crew like a mountain that had no intention of moving. "You really think this is about skill?" he asks, his voice calm, but carrying a weight that makes some of the bikers shuffle uneasily. One of them, a shorter man with tattoos creeping up his neck, leans toward Rick. Dude," he mutters, voice barely above a whisper. "You sure about this?" Rick scoffs. "You scared of him? He ain't gonna do nothing." A small crowd gathers at the edge of the lot. Some locals step out of their cars, phones raised, murmuring in hushed excitement. Inside the diner, customers press against the windows, their faces glowing from the bright lights outside. The waitress, who had been holding her breath inside, pushes the door open just enough to peek out. Her hands tremble against the frame. "Oh my God," she whispers, eyes darting between Rick's crew and the towering figure of Shaq. Rick takes a step forward, cracking his knuckles. "Come on then, big man. Let's see what you got." Shaq sighs, rubbing his temple like a disappointed teacher about to school an unruly student. "See, that's your problem," he says. "You think this is about throwing punches. It's not." Rick scowls. "What the hell are you talking about?" Shaq takes a slow, deliberate step forward. Rick flinches, just slightly, but enough for the bikers behind him to notice. Some exchange nervous glances. Shaq keeps his voice steady, firm. "This is about knowing when you've already lost." Rick clenches his jaw, trying to keep his cool. "I ain't scared of you," he spits. Shaq chuckles again, except this time it's colder. "You should be." Right then, the sharp sound of tires screeching breaks through the tense air. Headlights cut through the crowd as a pickup truck swings into the parking lot. The driver's door flies open, and heavy boots stomp against the pavement. The crowd parts like the Red Sea as a broad-shouldered man in a tan uniform steps forward, thumbs hooked into his belt. His silver badge gleams under the neon lights. Sheriff Tate. His eyes sweep over the scene before landing on Shaq. His expression shifts from caution to something close to disbelief. "Shaquille O'Neal?" he asks, his voice thick with surprise. The bikers exchange panicked glances. The weight of the moment sinks in. Rick stammers, his bravado cracking. "Sheriff, we were just—" Tate raises a hand, silencing him. His gaze flicks back to Shaq. "You want to tell me what's going on here?" The entire parking lot holds its breath, waiting for Shaq's response. The sheriff lowers his sunglasses, eyes widening in recognition. "Shaquille O'Neal?" His voice carries across the now silent parking lot, cutting through the tension like a blade. The bikers shift uneasily, their confidence crumbling as they realize what just happened. A few exchange nervous glances, as if silently asking each other how they ended up in this situation. Rick, however, isn't ready to back down yet. He folds his arms and scoffs. "What, you two know each other?" The sheriff takes a slow step forward, hands resting on his belt. "Yeah, I know him. Pretty sure the whole world does." He turns to Shaq with an amused smirk. "So, what brings you to my little town, big guy?" Shaq chuckles, completely at ease. "Just passing through. Thought I'd stop for a burger, but it looks like I walked into a reality show instead." The small crowd that is gathered laughs, but Rick isn't entertained. His jaw tightens and his fists clench at his sides. He's losing control of the situation, and he knows it. "These guys causing trouble?" the sheriff asks, tilting his head toward Rick and his crew. Shaq shrugs. I wouldn't call it trouble. More like a misunderstanding, but we were about to take it outside. Rick's cocky smirk returns. Damn right we were. One of the bikers standing behind him clears his throat awkwardly. Rick, maybe we should just... Rick spins around. Shut up, Dale. The sheriff raises an eyebrow. Take it outside, huh? He looks at Rick like a disappointed father about to scold a reckless kid. Now let me get this straight. You thought starting something with Shaquille O'Neal was a good idea? The bikers, now fully aware of their mistake, avoid eye contact. One of them whispers, Dude, this is bad. Shaq crosses his arms, letting the moment sink in. Yeah, Rick. Still think this is a good idea? His deep voice carries a teasing edge, making it clear that he's enjoying watching them squirm. Rick hesitates, his bravado starting to crack. He looks around at his crew for support, but most of them are subtly inching away from him. Man, we were just joking, Rick blurts out suddenly, forcing a laugh that sounds anything but genuine. The sheriff lets out a slow, disappointed sigh. Joking, huh? His expression hardens. Well, Rick, I don't think I'm laughing. The crowd murmurs. The bikers look nervous. And Rick? His face turns red as the sheriff reaches for his radio. Why don't you tell me the punchline while I call this in? A teenager in the crowd holds up his phone, camera rolling. Yo, this is crazy, he whispers. A few clicks later, and the video is live. The world is about to see Rick's worst mistake. The air outside the diner is tense. Shaq stands with his arms crossed, a knowing smirk on his face, while Rick and his biker gang shift uncomfortably under the sheriff's glare. The crowd has grown, diners, passers-by, and now a handful of people with their phones out, recording every second. Rick's face is red, but whether it's from anger or embarrassment, it's hard to tell. We were just joking, he grumbles, his voice lacking the cocky bravado he had inside the diner. The sheriff takes a slow step forward, adjusting his belt. Didn't sound like a joke to me. His eyes sweep over the bikers. And from what I hear, this ain't the first time y'all tried to scare someone off. A murmur ripples through the crowd. Someone whispers, I knew these guys were bad news. Shaq tilts his head. So let me get this straight. You were just joking when you kicked a chair in front of this man? Just joking when you tried to block him from getting a meal? He chuckles, shaking his head. Man, you need better jokes. Rick clenches his jaw. I don't need to listen to this. He turns to his gang, expecting them to back him up. Come on, let's go. But no one moves. One of the bikers, a younger guy with a long beard, shifts his feet. I think we should just go home, man. Another one, a tall, wiry guy, scratches his head. I don't know, Rick. You kind of started this. Rick glares at them, his temper rising. You're just gonna stand there? The tall biker shrugs. Dude, that's Shaq. The reality of the moment sinks in. Rick isn't just being humiliated in front of a small crowd. This is going online. It's already online. Someone's phone dings. Bro, a guy in a hoodie says, staring at the screen. The video already has 1,000 views. It's blowing up. Rick's eyes dart around wildly. What video? Hoodie guy flips his phone around. The screen shows a perfect shot of Shaq standing tall, Rick's weak protests, and the sheriff's unimpressed stare. The title? Bikers try to intimidate Shaq and instantly regret it. Rick lunges for the phone. Delete that. Hoodie guy yanks it back. Nah, man, too late for that. Ding. Another notification. Another. The teenager grins. Oh man, this is everywhere. Rick takes a step back, rubbing his face. His cocky smirk is long gone, replaced by sheer panic. Y'all can't just post this. The sheriff shakes his head. Actually, they can. And if you keep running your mouth, I can take you in for disturbing the peace. The color drains from Rick's face. His gang is already backing away, some of them mumbling about laying low for a while. He's losing them. Shaq leans down, voice calm but firm. See, Rick, the thing about respect, you either give it or lose it. Rick swallows hard. He knows. He's already lost. Rick's hands curl into fists, but his shoulders slump. His gang walks away, leaving him alone. Someone in the crowd mutters, guess he's not so tough after all. And just like that, The king of the diner is nothing more than a meme. Rick turns to his crew. Back me up. But no one moves. Rick's voice wavers slightly, though he tries to mask it with bravado. Come on, guys, we ain't gonna let this slide, right? He looks from one biker to the next, but the loyalty he was counting on isn't there. The weight of the situation crashes down around him like a collapsing house of cards. The gang that once followed his every command is now hesitating, stepping back, avoiding eye contact, shifting uncomfortably under the eyes of Shaquille O'Neal and the town sheriff. You got us looking stupid, man, one biker mutters, shaking his head. Yeah, another agrees, voice dripping with resentment. This ain't what we signed up for. Picking fights with random folks over nonsense? Getting embarrassed in front of the whole town? Nah. A few of them glance toward the crowd where smartphones are still recording. Their faces are already on the internet. Their so-called tough guy act exposed for the world to see. This isn't the reputation they wanted. Rick clenches his fists. Y'all serious? After everything, you're just gonna walk away? One biker, a tall, bearded man named Joe, crosses his arms. Ain't about walking away, Rick. It's about not being idiots. You dragged us into this mess, and now look where we are. Rick's confidence crumbles with every passing second. The sheriff watches the exchange with an amused but firm expression, arms folded. He doesn't need to say a word. Rick is already losing his grip on his so-called authority. You got yourself into this mess, Joe continues. And now, you can get yourself out of it. A few of the other bikers exchange glances before taking a collective step back. One by one, they turn and start walking toward their motorcycles, done with Rick and his reckless behavior. You'll regret this, Rick hisses through gritted teeth. Yeah, Joe scoffs. Pretty sure we already regret following you. A murmur of agreement spreads through the remaining bikers, and within seconds, their engines are roaring to life. One by one, they peel out of the parking lot, leaving Rick standing there alone. His face is red with fury and humiliation, his hands still balled into fists. But there's nothing he can do. His power is gone, just like that. The sheriff steps forward, adjusting his belt. Well, Rick, he says casually, looks like your boys just made the smart choice. Maybe you should too. Rick glares at him but doesn't say a word. His mind races for a way to salvage the situation, but there's nothing left to salvage. Shaq smirks. Time for you to leave town. The crowd murmurs, waiting for Rick's response. Rick swallows hard, looking around at the faces of the people who just witnessed his downfall. Then without another word, he turns, shoving his hands into his pockets, and trudges toward his bike. The last one still parked in the lot. The sheriff watches him go, shaking his head. Some people just gotta learn the hard way. The cameras are still rolling, the internet is still watching, and Rick, he just lost everything. Rick grits his teeth, fists clenched at his sides. His face burns red, whether from anger or humiliation. It's hard to tell. You think you're better than me? He spits, his voice sharp, filled with resentment. Shaq doesn't flinch. He just looks down at Rick, arms crossed, his towering frame casting a long shadow over the disgraced biker. His voice is calm, too calm. No, Shaq says, tilting his head slightly, but I know how to treat people with respect. Rick opens his mouth to argue, but Shaq holds up a hand. And that's why you just lost everything. The words hit like a punch to the gut. Rick looks around, expecting backup from his crew, but they're already taking a step back, shaking their heads. The sheriff watches with his arms crossed, unimpressed. The onlookers, civilians, bikers, diner patrons, are all staring at him. Rick suddenly realizes he's alone. A muscle in his jaw twitches. This ain't over, he mutters. His voice lacks the usual arrogance, though. Shaq lets out a short laugh. Oh, it's over. You just don't know it yet. The sheriff clears his throat. Rick, you got two choices, he says, stepping closer. Either you and your boys leave this town peacefully, or I take you in for disturbing the peace. Rick scoffs. For what? I didn't lay a hand on anybody. The sheriff lifts an eyebrow. No, but you sure tried. And lucky for you, we got a witness here who could have turned this into something much worse. He nods towards Shaq. Rick glances back at his crew, but the betrayal is clear in their faces. They won't fight for him. Not after this. Shaq leans in, his voice dropping low. You had a chance, man. You could have just let him eat his burger. But nah, You wanted to be big. Now look at you, smallest guy in the room. Rick swallows hard. He knows there's no coming back from this. Now be smart for once in your life, Shaq adds. Get on your bike and go. Rick hesitates, just for a second, then turns sharply, shoving past his former crew. He storms toward his motorcycle, kicking the kickstand up with more force than necessary. Without another word, he revs the engine and speeds off, dust and gravel kicking up behind him. One by one, the remaining bikers follow suit, riding off into the night. A heavy silence lingers. The sheriff sighs, shaking his head. Been wanting to deal with that punk for years. Didn't think it'd take Shaquille O'Neal to do it. Shaq turns to Carter, his serious expression melting into an easy smile. Come on, man, let's get you that meal. Carter, who's been standing frozen the whole time, finally exhales. He glances around at the crowd, people nodding at him with respect. A waitress looking relieved, the diner owner staring at Shaq like he just saved the entire town. Carter shakes his head, still in disbelief. Shaq, I don't even know what to say. Shaq claps a hand on his shoulder, leading him toward the diner doors. Say extra fries, and let's eat. The crowd chuckles, and as Shaq and Carter step inside, the tension from the night slowly fades away. But one thought lingers in Carter's mind. This night wasn't just about a meal. It was about respect, something no one should ever have to fight for. And thanks to Shaq, he didn't have to. The diner hums with energy, the tension from earlier replaced with excitement. Conversations overlap, phones are out, and people are still rewatching the viral video. Carter barely takes a step before a stranger claps him on the back. You all right, man? Someone asks, a middle-aged man with a kind smile. Carter nods, exhaling deeply. Yeah, I think so. The waitress, who had been too afraid to intervene earlier, hurries over with a fresh cup of coffee. On the house, she says with an apologetic smile. For everything you went through. Carter glances at the steaming cup, then at the burger plate being set in front of him. Thick, juicy, piled high with toppings. His stomach growls, reminding him he hadn't eaten since the morning. Appreciate it, he says, finally taking a seat. Meanwhile, the diner owner, a stout man in a red flannel shirt, shakes his head. I should have kicked those guys out ages ago, he admits. Didn't think they'd go that far. Shaq, who's leaned against the counter, raises an eyebrow. Then let this be a wake-up call, he says. You got a business and a community. If you don't protect it, no one else will. The owner nods, rubbing the back of his neck. You're right. No more looking the other way. At a table near the back, a couple of young guys talk in hushed voices, their eyes flicking to Carter. One of them finally gets up and approaches. Hey, sir, he starts, looking awkward. I just wanted to say, what happened to you wasn't right. Some of us, he glances back at his friends. We don't stand with those bikers. Not everyone here's like that. Carter takes a sip of coffee, letting the warmth settle in. He meets the young man's gaze and nods. I know, he says, and I appreciate you saying that. Outside, the parking lot is empty now. The roar of motorcycles had faded long ago. Whatever power Rick and his gang had held in this small town was gone, and it wasn't coming back. Shaq, still watching Carter closely, pulls out his phone and dials a number. Yeah, he says after a moment. We need to do something bigger. Carter looks up from his burger, confused. What do you mean? Shaq flashes a knowing smile. You'll see. A week later, Shaq posts a photo online. The caption, New Scholarship Fund for Young Black Teachers, in honor of Mr. Carter. The post spreads like wildfire. Within minutes, thousands of likes, shares, and comments flood in. This is how you use your power. One comment reads, Shaq, you're a legend, another says. Donations begin pouring in from all over the country. People moved by the injustice Mr. Carter faced and Shaq's decision to turn the moment into something meaningful. At the small-town diner, Mr. Carter sits at a booth, his phone buzzing endlessly. He can't stop staring at the scholarship announcement. His hands tremble slightly as he reads the words over and over again. The waitress, the same one who had nervously watched the bikers harass him days ago, refills his coffee. That's you, isn't it? She asks, nodding at his phone. Carter chuckles, shaking his head in disbelief. I guess it is. Her face turns red with embarrassment. I should have stood up for you that night, she admits. I was scared. Carter meets her eyes and offers a small, forgiving smile. We all make choices in the moment. What matters is what we do next. The scholarship fund explodes in size. Celebrity donors, major organizations, and everyday people all contributing. Within a week, the fund has enough money to support dozens of future educators. Shaq doesn't stop there. He calls Carter personally. "Got some good news for you," Shaq says with a grin. "You ever think about going back to school?" Carter swallows hard. He had once dreamed of becoming a teacher, but life had other plans. Bills, responsibilities, and bad luck had kept him stuck. "Yeah," he says, voice thick with emotion. "I have." "Well," Shaq replies, "your tuition is covered, full ride." Carter's breath catches in his throat. I, I don't even know what to say." Shaq laughs. "Just promise me one thing. When you make it, you help someone else do the same." Carter wipes his eyes and nods. "I promise." Meanwhile, Rick, the once fearsome biker leader, is now nothing more than a joke online. His sneering face, frozen in shock when he realized he was messing with Shaq, has been turned into countless memes. When you think you're tough, but Shaq walks in. Lesson of the day: know when to sit down. His gang abandoned him. His reputation shattered. No one feared him anymore. As Carter looks out the diner window, watching life move forward, he realizes something. Strength isn't about muscles. It's about how you use your power.